Hello everyone, how's it going? In this video I wanted to go ahead and make a quick comparison between Cycles, Eevee and Eevee Next, mostly from a realism perspective. We will be taking a look at 3 demo scenes that I have prepared using older videos and as well a new one that you haven't seen up until now. So let's keep this fast and start with the first scene, which is the result of a tutorial that we have worked on a couple of months back. Link will be up. Now the result is Cycles, as you can see in front of you, and for the comparison we'll be going ahead and using Eevee Legacy and Eevee Next. Eevee Legacy will be used inside of Blender 3.6.1, and for Eevee Next we will be going ahead and using the beta version of 4.2. So not the newest version, but the version that's the most stable in 4.2. So for these settings, I try to keep them as neutral and as default as possible, with the exception of enabling screen space reflection and image occlusion for Eevee Legacy. And for Eevee Next, we kept almost all of the values set to the default except ray tracing, as you can see in front of you, which we have enabled as well. Now, as you can see, the settings are by default, right? Nothing changed much. And for the color space, we are using the same one throughout both of the scenes. These scenes are exactly the same exact lighting setup, and same settings and everything. So this is how Eevee looks, Eevee Legacy. For the lighting, I'm using the sky texture without the sun disk since it doesn't work, unfortunately. And I replaced the sun disk with a sun light, which is the exact same one in the other scene. Now, as you could see, it looks just like regular Eevee, with all of its flaws and pros. Let's take a look at how Eevee Next looks. Way different, as if it's a totally different render engine. As you could see, let's go ahead and make a quick side-by-side comparison so it's more visible. As you can see in front of you, Eevee Legacy is onto the left of the scene and Eevee Next is onto the right of our screen. Now, first of all, it looks like the values are very different and the hues, but the lighting is exactly the same, the materials are exactly the same, the camera angle is exactly the same. So why is it looking like this? Well, mostly because of GI interpolation. Roughly, you could go ahead and improve this by adding irradiance maps and other tools that will improve the look of Eevee and emulate GI, global illumination. You could also try to improve the lack of contact shadows inside of Eevee Legacy by enabling it for each light in its settings. So as you could see, and even when you do that, it looks inconsistent and it changes with how zoomed you are, from where you're viewing it, and it shouldn't do that, obviously. As you can see in front of you, we have many artifacts here which ruin the scene. Same thing goes with the depth of field, which is regular, and the shadows just look horrible. They look way too different. If anything, the preview without the jitter looks way better than the actual render once it has a bit more samples. Now, on the other hand, for Eevee Next, it does have its problems, but honestly, it looks way too impressive. The globe seems like it has real global illumination. The contact shadows are there. If we enable jitter, then we will get the same problems that Eevee Legacy has, but if we disable it and keep everything set to the default, it looks very similar to the shadows that Cycles makes, although way more sharp, right? Way more sharp. So you might have to go ahead and compensate for that when switching between Cycles and Eevee. We also have the very nice influence settings, which can make us specify what do we want our light to influence. Do we want it to influence everything or only the diffuse? For example, if you don't want it to show up in, like, let's say, try to generate caustics, you can disable it from the refraction, or you don't want it to have a harsh shadow harsh fall off for the volume in your principled volume shader, you can go ahead and disable it. And that way you have a sort of emission look instead of the regular realistic volumetric look. You know, it has its case uses. But going back, as you could see, very different. For our second example, we can go ahead and take a look at a scene that we have made a while ago using cycles. Again, tutorial is on my channel. In addition, using 3.6 and 4.1 like the previous, these scenes are identical. The same lighting, the same scene, the same everything. Again, I only enabled screen space reflections and ambient occlusion. The color space is exactly the same as well. So let's take a look at how Eevee Next would look. It looks very similar to cycles, although not exactly, but honestly it looks extremely impressive. And it's not as visible right now, so we might need to go ahead and zoom in, especially the depth of field looks way better in my case, and the colors look way richer. The image has the right contrast. Now, Eevee usually is very sensitive to ambient lighting. It doesn't practically hold any details, right? It seems like you have literally just plugged a JPEG instead of an HDRI. Now, as you could see, for the depth of field, it looks very different, right? Same thing goes for the back area here. You know, Eevee Next seems to have way richer colors and a better all-around depth of field setup. Also, it doesn't jitter as much, right? It doesn't flicker. That's the word I'm looking for. It doesn't flicker as much. Now, zoom in on the bark, right? We can see some issues into the refraction, but you know, that may very well be me not optimizing anything, right? I just converted these scenes into Eevee and fired up this comparison to make it as neutral as possible. I don't want to spend too much effort in order to make one look good, since this will make it less like a fair comparison, right? Now, the biggest difference seems into the bug. The bug has some subsurface scattering, which is very visible inside of Eevee Next, so Blender 4.2. On the opposite, inside of Eevee Legacy, it doesn't look like it has anything at all, right? And all around, the colors are more rich, the depth of field is way superior, and the contrast between the shadows and the highlight is great as well. Again, I'm using the same color space. So as you could see in front of you, here is the difference. Personally, I say there is no comparison between Eevee Next and Eevee Legacy, especially that the performance is quite similar, although Eevee Next is a bit less reliable and a bit less stable, in my case at least. This may very well be an issue in Blender 4.2 and Blender 3.6, which is way more mature. So, as you could see, you're getting another pass of comparison, right? So, same thing. Mostly in the colors and shadows, as well as the depth of field, looks extremely different. So hopefully this gets picked up through YouTube. But as you could see, looks very different. The values look very different. Again, the color space is the same, right? Although it seems like a totally different color space, in all honesty. But it is exactly the same. Let's take a look at an interior scene. This scene is made inside of cycles. This one was a previous tutorial that I have brushed away since it was a bit too hard to follow through and a bit too long, right? Here we have the same lighting that we will be going ahead and testing inside of Eevee Legacy and Eevee Next. Simple HDRI and a sun. This is using cycles, right? Let's go ahead and take a look at how it looks inside of Blender 4.2 again and Blender 3.6 as well. Now, in interiors, Eevee does struggle a lot. which is what we're going to take a look at now. Same thing, same drill, same settings, same everything. And we can see a lot of issues firsthand. Now let's take a look at Eevee Legacy. Again, I have only enabled ray tracing, since why would you not? And it honestly looks very impressive, like a great preview. Not as contrasty and shadowy as Cycles, but extremely solid, right? Also, in my case, it does seem to have some issues with the auto smooth, but you know, this is a beta version. It will get better with time, obviously. Now, with everything, let's just take a look at both of these scenes side by side as well. Now, as you could see, both scenes are the same but look very different, right? The lighting setup looks way too different. Eevee Legacy has no contrast practically. The image is very ambient. The shadows are very flickery, right? And the colors are very different and always lean to the bluish color. Now for the other one, Eevee Next, it looks a bit more contrasty, not as much as Cycles, but good enough. The shadows also look great, right? The shadows work perfectly without enabling any settings inside of the light itself. The colors are more warm for some reason, and the general image has a sort of nice softness that Eevee Legacy kind of lacks. And I will be zooming in so we can see this a bit more clearly. Now I have also noticed a difference inside of the bump, which we will take a look at in the moment after taking a look at the difference in the shadows. Now as well, the shadows in Eevee Legacy lack any contact shadows, which you need to enable in order to see them. But by default, you don't have them. The shadows are not at all actually smooth, right? It should be smooth, but it looks jittery. And it flickers a lot with some jagged shadows, as if it has an anti-aliasing issue, right? Now look at how beautiful these shadows are inside of Eevee Next, you know, way different. We don't even have, it seems like we have actual indirect global illumination. So we have indirect light rays, you know, coming from the ray tracing, which is extremely solid inside of Eevee Next, and as I noticed, didn't really add much to the render times. Now for the displacement, it seems actually different, right? Eevee Legacy, you know, has a bit more exaggerated and a bit more intense, while as the opposite is for Eevee Next. Eevee Next seems to resemble Cycles a bit more in terms of the bump, right, and the normals as well. Now zooming back out again, we can see very different for the light. Now we can also see some slight light bleeding. I made sure that my geometry is correct, but you know, for some reason it still has this issue. Another fix would be probably adding another layer of walls, but in my case I didn't really want to spend too much time to make one look better than the other, to keep it as neutral as possible. So the material, as I mentioned earlier, I did some slight changes to the material for Eevee Legacy, but I didn't want to spend too much time. Now, in this case, I don't quite understand why it looks like this in Eevee Next, right? It does, actually to mention, look different when I open the scene in Blender 4.3, which is not expected, but, you know, it happens. The glass behaves way differently as well, right? And all around, I can't just get over the fact of the very nice shadows, which we'll be taking a look again. Now, one big thing is displacement support in Eevee Next. Yes, we can now go ahead and add displacement throughout the shader inside of Eevee. So in real time, you have some very nice displacement, right? Instead of going ahead and doing this by geometry inside of the displacement modifier. Now, as you can see here, we don't have any option in the settings to enable actual displacement. But when we do this inside of Blender 4.2, we have an option just like cycles, which we can enable the displacement only or displacement and bump as well. Now something is happening. The mesh is being distorted and deformed between geometry, which is why I'm going to subdivide it a couple of times, and it seems very, very fast, right? So we don't really wait for any like calculating mesh or VBH. We don't wait for any of that inside of Eevee. We get this in real time, which is extremely impressive. Kind of resembles the way Unreal Engine 5 works with its displacement. As you can see, I'm playing with this, with the, I think I sped up the video slightly, but it's extremely fast, in all honesty. Let's go ahead and add another light and see how it works with different lighting, right? And as you can see, extremely impressive and interesting for a real-time engine. So it seems that we have a slightly nerfed, or not slightly, but relatively nerfed cycles for real time. So it's amazing, mostly for working fast in preview, right? Working on shaders and materials. Now we can even go ahead and do this with displacement, which is honestly mind-blowing. As you could see, if we go ahead and disable ray tracing, we could see that, the scene gets very dark. The secondary light bounces just disappear. We don't have any light through the ceiling, but when we go ahead and enable them again, we get some very, very solid global illumination. As you can see, we still have that issue of light leaking. Again, can be fixed, but I didn't want to go ahead and cheat my way around this. Now again, with ray tracing, very impressive. Let's do the exact same test inside of Eevee Legacy and see how it looks. Let's disable our rod, and as you can see, the shadows look, as always, relatively bad, horrible, right? Inside of the viewport at least. And in comparison, this looks like a usable scene even, right? It might be a light from outside, light from a lamp outside, from a street light, right? But it still looks solid. As you could see, we have that issue in the light leakage, right? The geometry is correct again, but somehow we still have this issue, which, you could go ahead and fix, but as I mentioned earlier, we can't. We also have this issue inside of Eevee Legacy, and it's way worse. Let me just rotate the sun, and as you can see, I don't know, it looks way worse, if you ask me. So this is light leaking, it's not actual reflections. I made sure of this. Now again, let's get this scene back to normal and do a last sort of round of comparison between the both, right? Now again, Eevee, different colors in between the Legacy and the next version. Way different sort of faking global illumination, right? Way different shadows, like extremely different shadows. Now Eevee Next, or Eevee, whatever you want to go ahead and call it, resembles cycles a lot, as you could see in front of you, although a bit less contrasting. This can be improved if you make the scene for the sake of Eevee Next. But, working inside of cycles, making the scene for cycles, just being able to go ahead and switch between both of them is extremely impressive without, much loss. There is loss in quality, but not as much as it used to be, which is, extremely positive, especially in these areas that I am highlighting with the pen tool. So mostly the shadows, the angles as well, the normals look way superior to how they looked beforehand. Now this looks roughly like something like how Unreal Engine looks, although a bit less realistic by default. And again, we make sure that the color space is exactly the same, right? As you could see in front of you, in a second will be fixed in a second now. But overall, I think we can go ahead, if we go ahead and improve and optimize the scene to work a bit better with Eevee, we can go ahead and just use it instead of cycles, right? Especially in this case when you have an animation. This render at 2K on a 470 took around 40 seconds, right, on Eevee Legacy, and around 50 seconds also on Eevee Next, which is extremely impressive. For cycles, it took around 2 minutes, very fast as well, but, extremely solid. Will save you a lot of time, especially for different scenes as well, with smaller light sources. Now, if you found this useful, go ahead and just subscribe, give your thoughts down below, and tell me what you might want to be interested in seeing next. Until next time, take care and enjoy yourself.